They called it the Golden Rock on message boards, a lump of metal the size of a house that chewed up sensors and spat out pure, useless money. A single bite, and every one of us could walk off the scrub decks, buy new names, and never answer to anyone again. We were outcasts and gamblers and engineers with too many debts and not enough patience, so we stole the sky. I remember the plan in shorthand: find the seam, cut quiet, fill the pod, slip the belt. That's what you say in bars when you're trying to keep your hand steady. The truth is messier. It's a stack of schematic prints, a friend who trusts you with his life for reasons you don't understand, a ship patched with duct-tape faith and heat-sealed hopes. We had 12 hours of EVA from the deployment to the rendezvous. 12 hours is a long time when the universe is trying to pry you open. We approached the rock like surgeons. From the bridge of the Marauder, the asteroid looked like a whale's belly, pitted, scarred, and catching sunlight in thin knives. The spec said metallic core, nickel iron, with streaks of an alloy that could spin markets into chaos. We called it gold because gold sounds cinematic. In reality, it glowed like a stubborn promise. My suit hissed when I sealed the helmet. The hiss was a small promise: air inside, the world outside, vacuum and indifferent stone. I clipped to the tether and felt the ship's kinesthetic lull as if it were a drunk companion trying to steady me. Juno, our pilot, spun the Marauder to a slow taxi, keeping the asteroid just on the port horizon. You learn that in space, perspective is currency. 1 degree off, and your carefully calculated approach becomes a weather report you can't survive. The crew was a catalog of good decisions gone sideways. Leela, small, fast hands, an ex-miner who once lost 10 digits to a bad splice and kept the rest, carried the cutter. Roach, a nickname earned honestly, was our welder and our moral hazard. He had a laugh like a crow and nerves like a thin wire. I handled comms and the rigging plans. My past involves a series of ports where I learned to hotwire things that shouldn't be hotwired. We had 2 others, Issa, who handled the sensor nets, and Cade, our bookkeeper of momentum, who could do math with a coffee stain and a cigarette ash. None of us were clean. We latched to the rock on the night side. Shadow was our friend and also our blindfold. The cutter's coolant smell, a game of ozone and metal, filled my helmet, a smell I associate now with desperate prayer. Cutting metal in microgravity is a study of patience. Sparks don't fall. They scatter like radioactive petals. They hang and glow and find places to bite. They make slow, burning constellations against the black. The cutter bit into the seams with a voice like a slow freight. The metal gave way in layers, and every exhalation felt like a small theft. We stuffed wedges, drove plates, and coaxed a seam open that shouldn't have been there according to the scans.
That's the luck of heuristics. On paper, the asteroid was a closed case. In person, it had soft places. When we found that pocket filled with that alien alloy, for a second the world simplified. The MAVs, mining autonomous veins, had missed it because the alloy altered the reflectivity of the surface. Humans, with eyes that know how to lie and hope, found it. Loading was choreography. The ore, heavier than you expect in 0G, needed ballast and a slow hand. We used suction rigs and magnetic clamps and a jury-rigged inertial damper that Cade swore by and cursed whenever the display hiccuped. For every pound we wrestled, the center of mass moved, and the ship breathed like a living thing trying not to toss its passengers into the dark. Roach jammed a sample into the pod, and his grin in the suit cam was a raw filament of triumph. Then the universe changed its mind. Issa's panel lit a flare across the HUD. "Proximity alert, trajectory deviation," she said, voice flat. You learn to hear flatness as the precursor to panic.
On the comms, static bloomed like barnacles. Sensors had picked up a shepherding swarm, a convoy of prospectors on a blind course, machines with legal claim and guns with legal teeth. We knew the belt. It has its own laws. Claim first, justify later. We had no claim. Juno's hands moved like someone defusing a bomb. She adjusted the Marauder's attitude, and I felt every thruster whisper through the tether. The plan shifted from thief's grace to running. We needed to seal the pod, detach, and get the ship's mass away from the rock before they closed in. Easy on paper. In real life, nothing is easy, and paper never fights back. Roach took a last swipe with the cutter to free a strut that lodged our clamp. The bit stuck, jammed, and then sang a note like a wounded bird. Sparks sprayed, catching on a seam of insulation that had been brittle for months. We watched the little orange flowers bloom and bridge to the tether we'd used to anchor the pod. In 0G, a flaming thread is a bad equation. It slithered toward the hull with intent. "Fire," someone said, not a shout, a syllable that shattered the coordinated calm. We hit protocol in a flurry. Leela abandoned the pod and slapped at the flame with a foam swatch. The suit's automated suppression coughed and sputtered like an old dog. My heart, a habit from before the suits muffled everything, thumped a useless rhythm. The hull's heat sensors chirped angry numbers, and the Marauder's integrity screen blinked red. The little fire, fed on insulation and panic, had a geometry that wanted to be a catastrophe. You don't get to be poetic when your habitat is threatened by combustion in a vacuum. There's a cheap romance in films about the lone hero punching through an explosion. Reality is the opposite. It's math and quick hands and the exactitude of rerouting coolant lines. Cade threw a splice over to Juno, and she fast-stepped to the controls with a surgeon's breath.
We rerouted power, cut non-essential systems, and Juno whispered a prayer in a language none of us could read. The fire coughed out, the hull cooled, and the pod, our golden hope, shivered but held. While we sucked in the breath the universe gave us, the convoy arrived. They shadowed us, ships like bad omens draped in corporate livery and arrogance. Small boats dropped like wasps, tethered lines, and a voice came over the open channel with a cadence someone had practiced in committee. Unregistered salvage within claim block 47. State your papers. I thought of every lawyer I'd ever owed. I thought of the faces of the people who would never get to change their names or their luck. I thought about the children my share could buy a future for, a weak human calculus that steadied my hands in the moment. "We're transient surveyors," I said, voice even, and the lie practiced smooth. The lie did what lies do. It bought a heartbeat. They boarded us in the way predators board prey, quick, efficient, and polite only in tone. The first man up the ladder smelled of government mint and antiseptic. He smiled like a species that never had to steal. Negotiations are an art, but our opponents traded in legal muscle rather than morals. Paper is heavy in the belt. Sometimes it is also the worst kind of weapon. Roach had a plan that smelled like gasoline and desperation. He'd left a contingency, a timed release in the cargo bay that would egress the pod's tether and give us a chance to bolt with attitude and velocity. It was a math problem with a heart. We baited a discussion with the boarding party while Cade worked the override. I faked a systems panic on the main console, the kind of showman's theater people expect from seasoned hacks, and as they argued in clipped, privileged tones, Cade slipped the final command. The pod let go. The physics of a runaway object in an orbital ballet is an elegant cruelty. The pod, laden with alloy and the weight of our futures, drifted into a new orbit, a slow, obscene arc that took it away from the asteroid, but not toward anyone else. The convoy shouted, engines updated, and someone cursed a name we did not know. The boarding team froze like explorers who had found a trap. In that freeze, we punched. We broke free in a flurry of thrust and duct tape. The Marauder's engines groaned and pushed us into a slingshot that made the guts of our stomachs forget where up was. We were a patchwork ship with patched hopes and worn drives, but the universe has little patience for hubris. It's kinder to speed. We burned for a window, threaded through debris like a needle, and the convoy tried to match our vector. They had ships built for muscle. We had a ship built for heart. The chase was an ugly poem. Missile suns, small guided packets skimmed past like stinging bees. We took a nick to a secondary tank, and the alarms became our choir. Lila cursed in a language of old ports and older losses and kept her hands steady on the transfer arms.
Juno found a path between two larger chunks of rock that the convoy could not risk. She threaded us through like a seamstress through cloth. For a moment, I thought we might lose it, all of it. The pod, our money, our names, swallowed back into the indifferent dark. And then luck, or the god of caution, smiled in the form of a fracture in their coordination. The convoy tried to cut us off and simultaneously avoid a cluster of debris. One of their boats clipped a shard and had to break formation. We saw the seam, tiny as a breath, and we took it. We made it to a depot, a black market yawning like an open mouth on the far edge of the belt. It was the kind of place that washes its sins with cheap synths and trusts. The pod was offloaded in a hangar that smelled like solvent and foolish courage. Hands moved over the alloy like priests over relics. The sample assays blinked green, and a number swam across the display that made me want to laugh and then cry. Purity beyond trade expectations. We sold the first batch through channels that smelled like smoke and old contacts. Money, even stolen Stardust money, melts into reality fast. The crew divided shares with the mechanical fairness of a bad will. We bought new identities, safe slots, and one by one we walked away with pockets heavy and futures rented. A few of us, me included, took less because conscience has a way of collecting its own toll. Cade kept his share in cold vaults, numbers that would buy him quiet for decades. Roach bought a small dive bar on Titan and swore he would never weld again. Lila bought a small patch of land on an orbital farm and started a garden that would never see rain. We paid the price in other currencies. The man who had first boarded us, the government-scented one, found us months later with a note pinned to his jacket, a single deactivated sensor, and a sketch of the asteroid. It was a message, not a threat. The belt remembers. It also forgives slowly. When I close my eyes now, which is a practiced art in sleep pods that cough and shudder, I see sparks. Not the pretty ones from the cutter, but the ones that hang when you steal light from the universe and the universe looks back. I see Roach's grin, Lila's hands, Cade's quiet math. I see the pod rotating through a black seascape, a bullet of metal and consequence. I see my own face on the vids I keep, older, steadier, marked by a choice that is both mercy and theft. People ask if I feel proud. The truth is complicated. There's a raw pride that comes from pulling off anything that the universe says you cannot. There's also the knowledge of what we cut loose in people's lives. The asteroid didn't just give us credit. It took from markets, from claims, from nameless workers who would have scraped that same alloy for less and never left. Theft in the dark is always a trade. If there's a moral, it's this. The belt doesn't care about justice, only balance. You tip the balance one way, and somewhere else it rights itself.
We walked away with new names and new scars. The rock kept on, indifferent and unpoetic, rotating through star fields like a tooth in a skull. We drank in bars that tasted like victory and paid for it later in ways that mattered more than money. Sometimes when a meteor lights the sky and I watch it fall on a world that still thinks it owns the night, I whisper to the dark and thank it. Not because I think I did right, but because the universe allowed us to try. We stole the sky, and for a while, just long enough to breathe, the sky was ours.